Today we will talk about the European Union. The European Union has developed over a period of years and not in one fell swoop as the United States did with the US Constitution. Started in 1950 and then built over the years to create a common market. Ultimately in 1985, a Schengen Agreement for the free movement of people, Eurozone actually, the European Union was formed in 1993 formally, the Eurozone with the euro currency in 98 and so forth. So little by little. And the reason the European Union was formed was with the original idea was that joining together would prevent further wars. Countries whose economies are tied together by trade don't attack each other, was what they believed. They wanted to increase economic growth, but they also wanted to spread what are called classic liberal ideas. Foreign trade, laissez-faire economic policy, individual liberties, freedom of speech and of the press, and democratically elected governments, rule of law, openness and transparency of government, private property, and so on. All of these ideas are very contrary to what's believed by autocratic rulers. So they really wanted to accomplish the flow of three things. They wanted products to flow from country to country easily, so they had the common market. They wanted people to move easily, so that's the Schengen Agreement, where you don't have to show a passport at a border, and money, where they have a common currency, the euro. Now, the European Union is formed quite similarly to the United States with separation of powers, where we have the president in the executive branch, Congress in the legislative branch, and Supreme Court in the judicial branch. And of course, in our Congress, we have a Senate and a House of Representatives, but the European Union and the executive branch, they have the EU Commission, legislative branch, they have Council of the EU and the European Parliament, and then the judicial branch, they have the Court of Justice of the EU. So it may look on the surface, quite similar to the United States. However, there is a major difference. In the United States, our union is based on a constitution. Their union is based on a set of international treaties, which means that for any major change, any nation can veto the change. So it has to be unanimous. Now, in the United States, how the powers are allocated between the federal government and state and local governments has changed. Originally, it was almost all in the state and local governments, but now it's almost all shifted to the federal government. In contrast, in the European Union, most of those powers still are in the local and the country governments rather than in the EU. And that has caused people such as the French President Emmanuel Macron to want to have a broadening of the European Union by having more and more powers at the federal level so they could have common fiscal policy, common foreign policy, and so forth. Now, as I said, it wasn't formed legally in one fell swoop, but the membership didn't all happen in one fell swoop either. It started with the core countries in this dark blue, and little by little, it grew over time with a major shift happening after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Now, there still are some countries that are still being considered and that are called candidates. Similarly, the European the Eurozone, some countries are in it, some countries are not. For example, on our tour, countries that are not in the Eurozone that will have local currency, Poland, Hungary, and the Czech Republic. And you have different foreign exchange rates at all the various places, and they go up and down over time. Now, the Schengen Agreement was really for the free transfer of people from country to country without needing your passport. However, that's overblown because you will need your passports at each of the hotels. Another organization in Europe is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO. And NATO is really critical because the three first countries, the Baltic countries of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, they feel that they are very vulnerable from either Russia or Belarus invasion because Vladimir Putin still believes that those three countries should be a part of Russia, or as they were part of the old Soviet Union. And should he choose to invade any of these countries, the ability for NATO to help is limited because right in the middle here is an oblast that's been retained by Russia when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991 or 92. And this is a very heavily militarized area. So it'd be very, very difficult for men and materials to get to these countries because there's only a small piece here that's not blocked by either Russia or Belarus. Now, what you see here is what looks like a smorgasbord of different countries can choose. Do they want to be a part of the European Union? Do they want to be part of the Eurozone? Do they want to be part of the Schengen Agreement? Do they want to be part of the NATO? It's all different. So you have to really look at the chart to see what countries are which. And so these countries that are going through have a lot of European connections, obviously. Now, among the countries we're looking at, Poland is really the big dog in terms of both square miles, size, and population. Czech Republic is also fairly large in terms of population, as is Austria and Hungary. In contrast, the Baltic countries of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania are really quite small, all less than 3 million people. Another way to look at things is where they are economically. In other words, what's the average gross or average income per person, per capita of these countries? In the United States is about 60,000. These are a little different today because these are 2017. But Austria is not too bad. It's closest to the Western European countries and the most prosperous. Czech Republic, quite similar. Slovakia, and it kind of drops on down. And you start looking at Poland and Hungary, their per capita income is about half of what it is in the United States. And Latvia is even worse. And if you look at Ukraine, it's way, way, way down. When I was there in 2018, things were also very, very cheap. So it kind of correlates. Now, part of the reason some of these countries are not as successful economically as others is that there is a lot of corruption and difficulty in doing business. Now, there are different organizations that have different indexes, and you can see that some of these countries that we're talking about are really down on the list in terms of corruption and so forth, with Hungary and Slovakia being way, way, way down in particular. So when it's difficult to do business, you're not going to have a thriving economy. The gross domestic product growth on an annual percentage basis has varied over the years. It's really been relatively slow as the European Union, and that's somewhat misleading because there's great variance between the countries. But obviously, there was a great drop during the COVID pandemic, and then there's been a subsequent revival to some extent. Now, there is a big difference, I mentioned, between some of the northern countries, such as Germany and Denmark and such, and some of these southern European Union countries like Italy and Greece, which have really been struggling for a long, long time. And that is one reason why Macron has pushed for a deepening of the EU, because there is a need for transfer payments to some of those countries, very similar to how the United States does it. Now, there is a great pushback from that by some people, particularly the people on the far right, the nationalist and populist groups, and because they use the EU and boot as really the talking points. They're really against help there. Now, there's some also differences, significant differences in taxation between how the United States and the EU works. You start first from economic theory. The economists like consumption taxes better than income taxes because they distort the economy less. They distort the incentives within an economy. So the United States uses a combination of income taxes and sales taxes, but usually the sales taxes don't touch services, such as haircuts and travel services and so forth. However, the European Union, they do use income taxes, but the major money raiser is their value added tax, which is a hidden tax collected at each level of production. So they don't have a sales tax, but they do have this value added tax at a much higher rate than our sales tax. So this is quite a bit different. It's also different in terms of labor laws. Their minimum wages are more robust than here in the United States, but really the big difference is their per diems for when an employee goes out of country to work, which is really kind of ironic because they want people to have freedom movement of people, but they really disincentivize someone working in another country for when you're part of Lithuania, that if you go out into Poland, then you get whacked. For example, in Latvia, the per diem is 210 euro per day, where the annual or the monthly income of that employee may be 1,000 euro. So it disincentivizes something, and that's one of the reasons why our tours are organized the way they are. Some of the countries are also criticized for having very, very strict termination or separation policies, which makes it difficult to terminate an employee. As a result, some people say that companies then are more reluctant to hire someone if they think they may have to terminate them within a short period of time. Another major issue in the European Union is migration. There is a very vast number of people who have gone from one country to another in search of opportunities. This is particularly true in the Baltic region, which has lost more than 20% of its population since the fall of the Soviet Union. People are just going other places. Poland people moved west to Germany. Some Hungary and so forth have gone to Poland. So there is a lot of movement there. So, but we also a major problem is immigration. With the unrest in Syria and in surrounding areas, there's been a huge number of people that have come to the European Union seeking a better life. In 2015, in particular, it was a real crisis. 1.2 million refugees just poured into the European Union. And Angela Merkel, Chancellor then of Germany, allowed about 1 million of them to come to Germany. And that was part of her undoing in German politics. Anyway, it's a major problem with Greece and Italy taking the brunt of this because they're the closest. So, but just be aware that it is a major country problem. Another problem is economically. Whereas here in the United States, we have the U.S. dollar and the U.S. government setting fiscal policy, monetary policy and fiscal policy can work together. In the EU, there's a monetary policy run by through the Eurozone. However, there's no common fiscal policy. And just as a contrast, the EU's budget annually is only about 1% of its gross domestic product. Here in the United States, the federal government's slice of the pie is 19 to 22%. So major difference. Whereas we have automatic stabilizers with higher income taxes as you make more money and more welfare payments when recessions happen, those things just are not available in the EU. Another major issue, for the European Union is its great dependence on Russian oil and gas. As you can see, some of these countries are very, very highly dependent on Russian natural gas. Now, they're making great efforts to reduce this reliance on Russia with the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So we'll see how well that they can get past this problem. Now, there is one gas pipeline, Nord Stream pipeline from Russia to Germany. You may recall from the news that this has been sabotaged. Well, there was a second pipeline proposed, and in fact, the construction had started, but Germany has now canceled that agreement with Russia. Another major problem that we'll hear in the news is the rise of populism and nationalism in some countries, particularly with the autocratic rulers in Hungary and in Poland. It's a major problem, but it's not restricted to those countries. There's the parties in all these other countries have also seen some rise. And you saw a demonstration of that in Britain with the passing of Brexit. Now, there was a real economic catastrophe predicted if Brexit happened. The results are still to be seen, but apparently it has not been quite as catastrophic as predicted, although it's really been thought to be a long-term drain on Britain. It's not a good deal for Britain nor the European Union. It has weakened both. But the real problem is Poland and Hungary challenging the freedom of speech in the press, particularly the rule of law taking over the courts. Can the European Union put sanctions on these countries? Well, if they tried, one or the other would probably veto that action because remember, the European Union, you need a unanimous vote. So the big question was the continuation of the transatlantic alliance under President Trump, and was it declined the liberal world order? You know, many of those ideals that the European Union was formed for. However, doesn't look to be quite so in danger of that now with the Russian invasion of Ukraine and President Biden's leadership in putting together agreements with the European Union countries. In fact, with Finland now joining NATO, this has really backfired on Putin. Now, one of the reasons that Brexit was so contentious with even these non-Britain countries is many of the countries we'll be visiting are net recipients of transfers from the European Union. Latvia, Lithuania, Hungary, Poland is big, over 11 million euros now net from amount that they give or pay taxes and so forth to the European Union and what they get back. Now, the big payers, or net payers, are Germany, France, and it was the United Kingdom. But with United Kingdom payments out of the picture now, that means there's a smaller pie to be divided and less money going to some of these countries that need economic help. So with that, thank you for listening. Hopefully this has been very useful to you in understanding how these individual countries fit into the bigger picture.